welcome to the final tutorial in our SwiftUI series. In this tutorial, we will be exploring how to write unit tests and use mocks in your iOS app. Let's dive in. Before we continue, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any new future videos. And if you have any questions, please comment down below and I will try to answer them to the best of my knowledge. So what are unit tests? Unit tests are actually automated tests that help you to verify that individual pieces of your code are working as expected. Like for example here, the view model. I want to make sure the get API data logic here is working properly. For example, we have this check here for URL, and we also have this do catch here for if we return a proper data or returning some kind of error. Additionally, in your real application, you might have more logic you want to check. So by writing unit tests, you can catch bugs before they make it into production and make sure that your app is working as intended. Unit tests are typically written using a testing framework, such as the XC test. An XC test is Apple's built-in testing framework for iOS, macOS, and watchOS. So let's take a look at this test file here. So this test file has been already generated whenever we create a project and we choose to create a unit test target for our project. So this one here is XC test that you import to do your unit test. So sometimes you do not have this unit test target here or the files here. So in that way, you need to set up the test target for the project. So in order to do that, you can actually go right up here, go to the file, and new, and target. You can actually type in by finding the unit testing bundle. Or you can go to the project here, go down right here. You can find the same thing. Once you do that, you just need to give the proper name for your test target, and you will be finished creating the new target for the testing. So for our unit test, we're going to write a unit test for this get API data for our demo purpose in this view model. So let's go ahead and create a new file. Choose the unit test case. Then I'm going to call it view model tests. Technically, I can delete this one here. We do not need that one there. And we have this view model test. So for our test, we can actually remove whatever that's default come with it. Okay, so let's start by creating a new test case, and each test case have to start with a test. So for our, you can find a different way of this different strategy, different documentation to explain how you should naming your tests and how you should test your different. There's a different way of testing, but for our purpose, our demonstration here, we're gonna using the function, the name of a function, and the input value, and also the expected return for our naming convention. So let's grab this name here. Get API data. We're going to make a capital G so we know it's a function. The input will be a URL string with URL string, and return return error. And then we want to use something to guide us to properly create the unit test, to set it up and to triggering a particular function, this function, and also testing our result. You can also set up things in there or tear down or destroy the instance or anything for the testing purpose for each test case as the default explanation here. But in our demonstration, we're not going to use that. We're just going to put it right into our test case. So we're going to call it arrange act and assert. And we want to import the URL string. So let's create a sample URL string. And we know we're going to return an error. So we'll try to make the URL as bad as possible. So we're going to call HTTP. It's going to call it bad URL. And next, we want to create this view model so we can actually do a test. And then for the act is actually the calling the function. So we're going to call view model dot get API with a sample string. And this is going to give us a warning because this is a async function. So just go ahead and add that. And also this is going to throw things back. So we need to use a do catch to catch the error. Put a try await in front of it as usual. And then we want to catch the error. So in order to do that, let's create an empty var. Let's call error result. And it's going to be an error, optional. And we're going to pass that into this error result if there's one, otherwise it will be nil. Since we're expecting to return an error, so this will be xct assert, which is a function part of the SC test framework. I'm going to call not now. It'll be an error result. So let's quickly run this. And you should be able to see this has been covered, which is not red. In order to enable that, make sure you check code coverage, and also go to edit scheme. Under the test, check the getter coverage for all targets. So that way you can see which part of code has been covered by your unit test. Also, the benefit of this is you can go on top of here to enable this to see how many coverage you have been covered. Currently it's 39% based on our project, and you can see which part of code has been covered as well. Some gray tree in the Xcode, so feel free to export of that. Well, let's continue our unit test here. And for next test case, we want to test whenever we are returning actual data, or the data may have some issues. So in order to do that, let me go ahead and grab the actual data. So put it into the code here that we can see, and let's continue from there. Okay, so as you can see, I already grabbed the JSON data here. Let's use that for our example to create our next test. But before we go test the actual success case here, I want to test the failing case. But in order to do that, we'll need to either to make an actual API call to receive the actual data. So how can we test that? So that's where the mocks for the unit test come from. So the mocks actually are objects that simulate the behavior of a real object in your app. So you can use mocks to test your code in an isolation and avoid dependencies on external systems or services. So basically, here is actually the real benefit of dependency injection come from. As you remember earlier for our earlier episodes or tutorials, we actually implemented the protocol for the network interface. So now we can actually create our own version of a mock network interface to test our different scenario for the view model class, this get API data functions. So in order to do that, we can create a file. We can just call a normal Swift file. We're going to call mock network session. And for that, we're going to create a class also called mock network session. We're going to inherit from this protocol. We're going to use this protocol as our a guide or a blueprint to actually implement that function. So you'll show it does not conform to the protocol. So just go ahead to fix that. Now you have a exactly similar function, but from a different class. Now we want to test the different cases. So in order to do that, we can actually say, we can pretend we're passing a URL, but we want to test real case and the fake case. So our real case data will be like this. So let's copy this into the mock as example, so we can see. And for the actual description, we can just make it shorter since it's a test. And for our actual URL, we can also use something not so important, www.google.com. For the actual data, you can test it or you don't have to. It's okay for it to be either one of them. And we want to make sure this data have two sets of data. One is success data. Another one is malformed data or misleading data or failed data. So in order to do that, you can basically change any of the symbol or type things inside of it. Since here, let's just change the type for the fruit. Let's go back to the item, see what kind of type we actually use for here. We use the fruit, Swiss, me, mobile food. Let's just call it something like maybe tree or something. So let's call this a tree. So in order to do that, we can pass in a identifier of something, part of this URL. So we can actually call it maybe let URL string equal to URL dot absolute string. And then we want to say this URL, we want to make sure we get out the string first. So if URL string equal to success URL, and we want to do something else if URL string equal to failed URL, and we want to do something. So for that something, I cannot call the non-function URL, can call value a non-function type string. Oh yes, for this one, we just need to remove this because this is non-functional. Sorry about that. And let's move this up a little bit. Okay. Now we have that. Then we just want to pack those into a dictionary and then convert that into a data. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's convert the first one as a success case, as you can see right here. We're just gonna call it let JSON equal to let item equal to the item name is gonna be apple. We double check something. Okay. So we're gonna call apple URL string is gonna be it's gonna be a URL. So URL gonna be gonna be https www.google.com. We need an exclamation point there. For the type, we're just gonna give a fruit description, we want to give just give this is an apple. You can do this way to encode the data, or you can just use a normal JSON like this. Name apple and name image URL https www.google.com. Next one, we're going to give a type. It's going to be a fruit. And we're going to give a description. This is an apple. And then remember, this is actually a dictionary inside an array, so we're going to call it let.json equal to an array of item. Now we have to convert this JSON into a data. So we can utilize try JSON serialization data with JSON and return this data. Next, we want to do the same thing. But we just want to change something in the type. As we showed right here in the tree, we're just going to call a type tree to make a fall. In order to make this more efficient, we actually can make a little bit of adjustment here. So let's just call it var item equal to a empty dictionary. So then we can just pass the item into there and call it at the very end and return this converted data back to our testing case. Okay. We can just make a string for now. Okay, here's our mock network session. Now we can go back to test our failed URL case and success URL case for our data. So let's go back here. Let's say func test get API data with URL string return error data. And we're going to write a range and that sample URL string is going to be equal to, which we can just copy this one here, failed URL. And then let a view model equal to a view model. Now here's something different. How you're supposed to use your mock network session. Remember, we created an initializer. By default, it's using a URL session and use the actual network session there. But now we want to replace that with our mock network session. Now you are using the mock version of the network session in order to trigger this test case. Next, we're going to create the act. Same thing, we're going to do a do catch. Let error. And we're going to call try away view model, get API data, and sample URL string. And we're going to also create our var error result. It's going to be an error. We're going to catch that. Last, we want to assert to first test out SAT assert not now. And then we can actually just go ahead and try to catch this error and print out what the error is. We can go ahead and go use error result. Normally, you can also catch the decoding error, but since we did not actually properly catch the decoding error and parse that back, we just parse everything back as an error. So it will be just part of this to come back. So let's say error result equal to error. We can actually see what's being passed back by just using this error result debug description, and we just give an empty string here to take a quick look here. Let's run this function again. And as you can see right here, it says exit equal failed because decoding error and data corrupted, and the data key was not key type was missing, cannot initialize item type from invalid string value tree, and basically it's saying it does not have the value for that key in our decoding the data model. So we can actually, so normally in normal case, you can actually go ahead, either go into the function here, adding some additional handling for this catch to pass that decoding error back. Then we can properly testing now that case. Or for our demonstration purpose here, we're just gonna leave that be for now. And we know we're having a error data come back. So that's gonna be not a now. And let's test again, and that's success. So if we go back to our actual code, and you can see here the error case has been covered. Next, we want to test if this actually come back with actual data. We can, by copying this, pretty much the same, except in the mock network session, we're going to call success URL, and with URL return data. So we're not going to have an error anymore, and this is going to be a now for our error. Next, we're going to test SAT assert true for our view model, items, count greater than 0. Next, we can also parsing out some of the information to double check we're actually getting the proper data back. So equal with view model, items, we're going to see the first thing, name going to be equal to apple. Let's run test again. And we have succeed. Somehow that did not show up green, but that is okay because Xcode sometimes do have the kind of bug there. We can just try to run the entire project here, and it should fix that problem here. Now let's go back to the view model again. You will see the entire function here has been covered by the unit test. And with that, we reached the end of the SwiftUI tutorial for beginner series. And I hope you found these tutorials helpful and that they've given you a good foundation for building iOS apps with SwiftUI. Happy coding!